Welcome to Postwave. You're here with Eric and Trevor.
So Trevor, this nice lady came up and she gave me this ice cream cone,
Yeah? What kind of ice cream is it?
strawberry, and I like it. I like the ice cream. I like having ice cream, but it's a really hot day out, and some of the ice cream melted, and it got on my hand, and my hand's all sticky, and also some of it dripped and it fell on the ground, so I don't get to eat that part of the ice cream anymore. So fuck it. I'm just gonna throw the ice cream on the ground. It's not worth it.
Sounds like a good decision to me. I don't see the problem with that.
And it's like she didn't even give the ice cream to me out of any sort of goodwill or anything. It's not like I asked for the ice cream. She just wanted to feel good about herself. Life's a bitch, huh? Mm.
I mean, I think to make that story more accurate, it would be more like you taste the ice cream, but it's flaming hot, and then you realize that your hand is super glued to the cone and can't come off, and that you're gonna have to walk around with the cone glued to your hand for the rest of your life.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, that's how it goes. So Trevor, how do you feel about anti-natalism? Do you buy it?
I have I have very like conflicted feelings because I feel like anyone I have very conflicted feelings about it because on the surface the whole argument is appealing in that you can kind of use it to cast aside everything bad about your life and just say, "Oh, the whole thing is just kind of rigged and it's all kind of crap in the end. So like I shouldn't I shouldn't blame myself for, it seeming that bad."
Mm.
Um and so it's attractive for that reason, but it's also a conclusion that uh, everyone basically agrees is wrong, and that it's basically common sense and the thing that you don't have to you shouldn't have to um, justify.
Mm.
So yeah, it's like a dissonance between the immediate like attractiveness of the argument
Mm.
versus just the knowledge that it's way more complicated than it's being presented as.
Mm-hmm. Would you say that it's tempting to not care about living, about existing, like, and that's the attraction?
I mean, it's not caring. It's that I don't think that not caring is equivalent to saying that that existence is inherently bad,
Hmm.
because not caring is just, oh, whatever happens is going to happen, it doesn't matter. But
Mm.
caring about whether existence is actively harmful,
Hmm.
that's a different thing.
Yeah. Um. Yeah. Okay. Um. So I definitely can buy into the feeling of like wanting to stop putting in the effort and caring and just like how is this broken world on my shoulders? It's not fair and it shouldn't be, and so screw it all. I
Mm-hmm.
don't care anymore. Um, that's tempting. I'm not saying I buy into that, but it's tempting for sure. Um,
Mm-hmm.
However, I completely think that the summing up the all the good things in the world and all the bad things and saying, oh, look, there's so much more of the bad quantity, so therefore the sum is negative. That's utter horseshit.
Well, actually, so I don't think that's exactly the argument that they're making.
Oh,
because it's not
because I
well,
think
it's not
that's
about
exactly
quantity.
what they're making.
It's not about the quantity. It's that no matter what the quantity is, even if it was, the most gigantic amount of pleasure and 1 second of pain, the argument is that even in that situation, it makes sense that non-existence is better than existence, which you can argue is obviously like silly, but the point isn't that the amount matters. It's that by nature, pain is treated differently than pleasure.
I think at this point, Ivan cries out, "That's plagiarism!" in delight and kisses Alyosha's hand. It's hilarious. This conundrum that they put forward is completely plagiarized out of The Brothers Karamazov by Dostoevsky. Yeah, this is exactly.
Oh, really?
So they have this scene where two of the brothers are talking, and one has this hypothetical story he made up where Jesus comes back, and the Pope sees him, and everyone's afraid of the Pope, and he captures Jesus and locks him in a cell, and he's talking to him, and the Pope says, "We don't need you anymore, go away." And then Jesus does. And so then they're talking about how they completely reject a world in which there is any suffering at all. So if some and that's interesting because it's built around the precept of a creator having intentionally made it this way. So there's a world, and there's just one person, Jesus, who has to be crucified and tortured in order for everyone to be saved. Do you accept that world? And they say, no. I respectfully return the ticket. Whereas, and they go on and they say, if there was just one miserable little child who had to be tortured, and then everyone would be happy and everything would be great, would you live in that world, or would you walk away?
Well, yeah. Once you start putting actual emotionally charged things harming children into the mix, things start to go haywire.
But it's the same hypothetical situation that you just posited. You have a world, there is some suffering. Do you accept that world, or would you, all things considered, let it pass by?
Something you said made me think about. So I mean, this is all rooted in the idea of a creator, right?
Yes.
So and I feel like this anti-natalist argument is very much a product of moving away from religion, and something that this philosopher Peter Wessel-Zappa has stated is that the kind of the absurd predicament of human life is a result of it being kind of an accident of evolution, that we're giving these tools to understand or to at least think that we can understand what's going on around us, right? And that it's probably out of our reach anyway. There's no, we can understand that we can't understand, but we can't actually grasp what's going on, and we can know of our impending death, but we can't really do anything to prevent it. No other animal is like that as far as we know.
That I don't know if I buy that kind of argument, because sure in our little world of this planet Earth, as far as we limit understanding, that we're the only sentient beings that has any concept of our own inevitable death and all that kind of stuff, but we don't know that is the case. And furthermore, if you consider the vast quantity of space and the likelihood of other intelligent beings, it becomes an emergent property of having a universe that that form of consciousness can exist and
Yeah.
does.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you don't have to say that it's only humans for it to be bad. I mean, it's kind of just the nature of existence that you can, and of consciousness and intelligence, that you can, apprehend what's about to happen. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think you can still make the argument that that's negative.
I don't know. So they talk about in this article, they talk about, or who's this written by?
David Benatar.
Okay, so this David bitch. So this guy talks about how. Now I got myself off track. He seems to talk as if dying is like so bad that it negates the value of anything that came before it, and I completely disagree with that.
I don't think that's his whole argument.
It's a part of his argument for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's it's the chance of dying just a horribly, like, drawn out, excruciating death. That the small chances of that you're kind of taking on as the price of admission, even if they're unlikely.
Yeah, I mean, of course there's always going to be a risk involved, but there's a huge difference between making a educated risk of saying, I'm going to bring a child into the world and that child is going to have a life, and there is some small probability that they'll have a particularly horrible edge case of human suffering, than to intentionally bring a child into suffering. Like, no one says, honey, let's have a child with a congenital birth defect. Oh, that sounds lovely, Sue. Let's do that.
Yeah, but I mean, even if the intention isn't there, like, and it doesn't have to be something catastrophic, like a severe disability, but any life is gonna have, a good amount of suffering and pain, and just even if it's just from losing people that are close to you, or being disappointed by not achieving things. I don't know. I think it's yeah, I think it happens in like smaller ways than that.
Yeah. Let's talk about what pain is. So, Trevor, what is pain to you?
So I mean, there are a couple different things you could talk about. Like, I mean, so there's like physical pain, right? It's literally like, that's hot, or that's sharp.
That's hot.
But then there's also, like emotional unease that I think counts as pain, or just, any kind of sadness or anger or fear, I feel like could be considered a type of pain. Maybe not so much anger, but I feel like anger is often like related to pain.
Related. I'm curious about this relationship. Like, can we put a finer point on what that relationship is?
Between anger and pain?
Between pain and any of those things you mentioned.
Yeah, so I mean, between like pain and sadness, I mean, so there's the sadness of like, knowing that a pain will persist, for longer than you want it to, right? And there's like sadness in knowing that, like, if you had never experienced, a certain level of pain before, afterwards you have this sadness of, knowing that that's possible.
I mean, I'm sorry, I'm just not buying it. I mean, I see that there's that possible relationship, but that's not the only possible relationship. My wonderful friend Erica just not long ago broke her leg, and she, not all the time, but she did some of the time refuse pain medication, and afterwards, while healing, she did not use any pain medication. She said she experienced possibly more pain than she ever has in her life, and she's done a lot of really painful things.
Yeah.
And she said that having had that experience was one of the most valuable things in her life, and she wouldn't have gone back and changed it if she had the opportunity to.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not saying that pain isn't valuable, because I mean, it definitely has, it can show you things about yourself, and it can, lead you to make the right decisions. I'm not saying it's totally like worthless, but it does come back to the fact that even if pain makes us feel good in the long run, there's still pain involved in that process, and that doesn't necessarily have to be the case, and this is interesting, because I actually think that's one of the weaker arguments for anti-natalism, is that like it could be, that we live for 10,000 years and just experience pain. Which, I mean, if we develop like AI and mind uploading, sure, maybe that could actually happen, but like as far as like anything realistic that we could actually attain right now, that's just like so comically outside of
it's like he's comparing this present moment with some hypothetical moment that could very improbably exist, and it almost feels as if he's saying, like, look, why would we have this imperfect world if it's conceivable we could have something else? Well, we should just toss in the towel. It's not worth it.
As far as like anything realistic that we could actually, attain right now, that's just like so comically outside of
it's like he's comparing this present moment with some hypothetical moment that could very improbably exist, and it almost feels as if he's saying, like, look, why would we have this imperfect world if it's conceivable we could have something else? Well, we should just toss in the towel. It's not worth it.
Yeah. But part of the point he's making is that the world is like a massively fucked up place. It's not just about you, and your personal like experience. It's like on a massive scale, like human, there's like so much suffering, not even just humans, but like animals too, right? Just that nature and biology itself is so kind of ruthless and doesn't really care about, reducing pain or suffering, because that's kind of what makes the machine tick.
So here's a question. Considering that there is pain and suffering in the world that we experience right now, is it a fundamental nature of existence that there should always be suffering?
I don't think so. I mean, we can definitely imagine creating like artificial intelligence that doesn't have suffering, hypothetically.
I don't know about that. So this goes into my own understanding of what pain is, which to me, pain is information. It is a awareness of a non-desirable state. And there's different kinds, of course. There's chronic pain and there's passing pain. And you kind of have to have both if you're going to have the other, because the first part that has to happen is the perception of pain. And then the purpose of it is to determine if there's something you can do about it. If there is, you fix it. you resolve the pain, and through that process, the pain has helped you grow. Now, sometimes there's chronic pain. Sometimes there's pain you cannot resolve. And that's simply a price of having the awareness of any sort of a desirable versus non-desirable experience.
Okay, so it's chronic pain versus like what do you call it?
I don't know, temporal pain.
Yeah. Yeah, temporary pain versus chronic pain. So you're saying that chronic pain is just kind of the price you pay for the kind of the instantaneous pain?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I guess there's really no way around it. And like, again, like it's hard to imagine like biological beings that evolve without pain because it's kind of involved in self-preservation. The other side of this is like we might be able to overcome these like quote unquote fundamental problems, within our lifetime with technology, and it'll become very clear that that it's good that we're here.
So he poses this question, and the way he poses it is like so obvious, like he assumes that one particular answer is the only answer you could possibly give. He says, would you endure a minute of let me find I wrote down the exact quote. So he says, would you endure a minute of the worst agony and torture if you would also get a minute or two of the greatest pleasures? And it's like, oh,
yeah, and everyone says
obviously
no.
not. But I would say yeah. Give it to me all. This guy obviously needs to spend some time in my dungeon. I'll show him a good time. I'll show him what pleasure is all about.
Are you sure you're imagining the worst possible pain?
Okay, but the thing about this is we can reduce it. We can say, okay, I don't know what the worst possible pain is, and I don't know what the greatest possible pleasure is. But let's say a amount of pain and an amount of pleasure that are kind of like standard baseline normal experience, and you can say, give me a minute of standard pain and then give me a minute of standard pleasure. I say yeah.
but that's like the standard version. So how does that, you're saying that still holds even when it's like infinitely bad and infinitely good?
What I'm saying is that these values are impossible to quantify, and it's kind of hilarious that he talks about it as if it's like a measurable experience.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like you can say that, in the middle, but when things are, either really bad or really good, it's harder to say that.
How do you mean?
I mean, so, you can imagine like death by drowning is obviously like really bad, right?
So they say.
And having sex feels pretty good. So like you really can't say that one of those things is better than the other one.
Oh, okay. So there's definitely there's some sort of gradient, but I think it's impossible still to quantify. And there's no way to say like the greatest pain is worse than the greatest pleasure.
Right. I mean, I still think, okay, so this is kind of the central point of anti-natalism, right? Which is this asymmetry argument, which is that you don't, if you don't exist, you are not hurt by the cool things you're missing out on, but there's a lack of pain, so that's positive. So there's a net positive for not existing, right?
Oh gosh. Wow. That's my heart pumping just to hear that. That seems so twisted to me.
But why is that?
It's hard. I do wanna say why, and I'll try, but it's challenging. It's like when someone says something that sounds like kind of plausible, but then like there's little logical incongruities baked in that are hard to notice, and so you just get this like gross feeling when you hear it. That's what I feel about this.
Yeah.
But I will try. I guess that's why we're here, to pick apart just why it's so garbage. Yeah, because it's like he has this assumption that pain equals bad, pleasure equals good. The value that is to be gained in life is identical to pleasure, and pain is the reason why you wouldn't want to. That whole system is kind of irrelevant to me. It doesn't hold any water, because it's not pleasure that makes life meaningful. Pleasure is just like a reward for something that we perceive as being good.
Well, it depends how you define pleasure. If you're talking about like low kind of base pleasures versus like life satisfaction type stuff, right?
I don't know. Because let's talk about, like, for example, dopamine, where you get a reward for something that your system perceives as being beneficial for itself. And you can have a system that's flooded with dopamine where you get rewarded all the time. And you can have a system that's almost deprived of dopamine, where it's very stoic and staunch. And either one is capable of having a meaningful experience, an awareness of the value of their own existence and of the existence of life.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful. And I mean, I'm playing devil's advocate here, but ultimately I think it is kind of a bad argument.
Yeah.
Just because well, there's also like the fact that the condition of you being able to judge whether life is worth living is dependent on you being there to judge it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. But yeah, I do think that the capacity to perceive meaning is like maybe the most important thing.
Absolutely. And that's not tied directly to pleasure, although sometimes pleasure comes as a result of that awareness.
Right.
And so it's entirely irrelevant to me to talk about how much pleasure or how much pain there is in the system. That doesn't have anything to do with the meaning of your existence.
Yeah. And I guess we're kind of talking about, like on the level of people, like individual people right now.
Yeah.
Right. And that's kind of a different argument than like on average, this, on average of human society for, hundreds of thousands of years wasn't really worth it, which is, I feel like that's a different argument.
But like, again, who's judging? Because obviously for the people who were there, it was worth it. Otherwise they would have just killed themselves.
Yeah.
There's a really, really, really arrogant quote that I'd like to share from you from this article. What's the guy's name again?
David Benatar.
David Benatar says, "Life is simply much worse than most people think. And there are powerful drives to affirm life, even when life is terrible. People might be living lives that were actually not worth starting, without recognizing that is the case.
Yeah, I know that sounds like silly, but like those like those thoughts like have some power, and like there's this thing called depressive realism,
Mm-hmm.
which I don't know if you've heard of that. Have you heard of that?
Is it the idea that when you're depressed, you have a more accurate perspective of the world?
Yeah, like humans are kind of uh engineered to be optimistic on average, and there's an argument to be made that if you're seeing things more realistically, you're going to be a little bit sadder because you're seeing how they like um you're kind of aware of all the bad stuff that's going on. um and it's kind of it's kind of the thing where like you keep telling yourself bad things won't happen and they keep happening, that kind of thing.
Mm.
um and yeah, it is true that we have like a biological bias for wanting to keep existing just because that's how life works.
Mm.
And it's not necessarily true that um that's a good thing. Yeah, I guess that's the kind of the whole question.
Yeah, like he talks about these powerful drives. I think that he needs to consider the possibility that those powerful drives to affirm life, despite the existence of pain, they might actually have some merit to them.
Yeah. I mean, I think at some level, it's hard to even question our drives because we're stuck with them, no matter what.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I mean, I think that's. I mean, it's kind of what I think is like our. I mean, satisfying our drives is kind of like part of what it means to be a human,
Mm-hmm.
But it's very easy to start down the path of like, oh, am I just misinterpreting like everything in my life and like kidding myself that any of it, like I'm kidding myself that the good parts are as good as I think they are, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
kidding myself that the bad parts aren't like as prevalent as they actually are.
Mm. Yeah. I mean, I think it's valuable to bring the critical eye to your existence, but it's also very, very important if you do so to recognize that when you take that depressive realist viewpoint and see the world, that's still a subjective perspective, and it's going to be incomplete. Even if it may seem to be more accurate than the optimistic perspective, it's still incomplete. It's not perfect.
Right. That's totally true.
That's
Yeah, I mean,
I think that's a rabbit hole that's very easy to fall into when you're in the depressive mindset, as I can attest to.
yeah, your brain just wants to like find the simple pattern that's there, and it's like everything is just shitty, because that's like a very like I said, it's kind on some level it's a very attractive thought because it lets you just put everything in one like bucket that's just like
Yeah.
stupid.
Uh-huh.
So one thing we haven't really talked about uh is the question of like from the parents' perspective, like whether it's a selfish thing to bring someone into existence, because the argument is that you can't consent to your own existence, and you're never consulted and you never agreed to be born. And your parents, despite whatever their intentions are, created you out of some kind of desire that well, it may have seemed to them like it was in your interest, it was actually just fulfilling their own interests
Mm.
for the kind of life they want to have.
Can't it be both?
Sure.
Yeah, it seems to me those two things aren't mutually exclusive. But he does actually. This is a really interesting point because he says something that I absolutely agree with. Let me see where I wrote it down. Yeah, so he says, quote, "It would be better if there were not an unbearable lightness of bringing into being." I absolutely agree with this. I think that a lot of people go into creating offspring with a very cavalier attitude without thinking it through at all, and that very cavalierness causes pain, unnecessary pain, and furthermore, not just the kind of like awareness of things are bad, but I should say it brings damage to their growth to have that lack of intention into their creation.
Yeah, I think people probably tend to underestimate, the extent to which having a kid like affects the world in just a whole bunch of ways that aren't really predictable.
Yeah, and also the extent to which your own existence and the world will affect the child. If you bring a child into the world as an inconsidered impulse without thinking about really considering their livelihood and like how you're going to bring them the best world that they can have, like they're going to be influenced by the impulsive world that you bring them into. They'll become slave to the same impulses, and they'll face the same drudgery that you dragged yourself through.
Yeah, and of course there's the problem of everyone thinks that they're above average and that they'll be a better parent than most people.
Mm-hmm.
And it actually, it takes so much to actually do the job right.
Mm-hmm. I think that because life is so meaningful, it's a decision that should be made with the utmost consideration and gravitas.
Yeah, I mean it's kind of, I mean, no matter what you think about religion or like spirituality, it's like a sacred it's a sacred thing, I would say.
Definitely. I mean, I think it doesn't have to only be deliberate, but it could also be inspired. I think that's another valid way to bring life into the world, is a true inspiration where it's like an immediate knowing of all of the possibility of your present actions and an accepting of that, rather than any sort of delusion being present in the decision.
What do you mean by that exactly?
It just seems to me that like you could have one approach where you have a very deliberate, thought out, conscientious decision to create children, and then you could have a different couple and an entirely different set of people. They would have an approach where their act of procreation, their love making, that it is love that they're creating, as opposed to being carnal impulses devoid of love.
Yeah, I think that there's a point to that, and I would say like the fact that something like love can exist at all is kind of justification, or can be used as justification for a lot of the suffering.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
because so I made this little flowchart here. So at the top we have you can make babies, and there's two options here. One possibility is that life is worthwhile to live, and therefore you did a good thing, despite any qualities about that life. If that life is worthwhile, then you did a good thing. If the life is not worthwhile, then you didn't do a bad thing, because it doesn't matter. Nothing matters at all. Right?
Wait. If creating a life was a bad thing, then it doesn't matter.
Oh, no. So if life is not worthwhile to live,
Yeah.
then it doesn't matter if you created a child and their existence was undesirable.
I don't know if you can say, because you're saying if it's bad to be alive, then it doesn't matter. I still don't get the. Or maybe I'm just getting it mixed up.
Well, yeah, I guess the language is here. So the thing that could be different is not whether it's good or bad to live. That would imply an oscillation between a positive and a negative. I don't think that's how the world works. You don't write binary code with ones and negative ones. You write it with ones and zeros, right? It's either it does matter or it doesn't matter. Life is worthwhile or it isn't.
It's interesting. I mean, like I still feel like somehow. So like. The question of anything mattering, I feel like is not quite part of this whole thing, because it's more it's not making a judgment about like there's no meaning. It's that it's just inherently unpleasant. So I think that's a separate thing than no meaning.
I think you're absolutely right, and I think that is the downfall of the anti-natalist argument, is that it fails to bring into the question of whether the existence has meaning, which as we've talked about is separate from whether there's pleasure or pain.
Yeah. Although you could say that you could also say that whatever the meaning is, it's not worth the pain.
No.
Because there's
that's what I'm saying here. You can't say that, because it's either meaningful. The meaningfulness is what imbues it with value of any sort. So if it's meaningful, then it has value, despite if it has pain as well. If it's not meaningful, it doesn't have value, and nothing has value, and so it doesn't matter whatever you do.
Oh, you're giving those anti-natalists a taste of their own medicine.
I don't know. It seems insurmountable to me.
I mean, a universe where things are meaningless and also painful, I feel like is worse. Because the meaning doesn't change like the actual strength of the perceptions of the pain.
I would say if you had such a hypothetical universe where there are a million beings whose existence does not matter, they are a meaningless existence, whatever that means. I don't necessarily believe that's possible. But imagine there's a million beings who do not matter, and those beings are suffering. And in this world, there is one kid, and that kid matters. He is, his life matters. He's a valuable entity, good, having good experiences and thriving and being alive. And to have that universe, I think, is worthwhile, because that one scrap of gold in there, that one kid had a meaningful experience. I don't care about the other ones. They don't matter. That's like inherent to their definition, is that they don't matter.
What if they're suffering like insanely so that this one kid can have like a meaningful experience?
Good. All that matters is that he had a meaningful experience. It's meaningful.
Because you're deliberately defining what matters is this one kid, so like that you're like,
yeah,
you're automatically gonna say that everything is worth that.
But so okay, so that's the thing that it is a silly situation, because I don't believe that there is such an existence as one that doesn't matter.
Yeah, I agree that like consciousness itself is what matters,
Absolutely.
and like the fact that that's happening at all is what matters.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think the meaning has to be separate from whatever kind of pain pleasure thing is going on, because you could always turn up the pain knob enough so that the meaning, whatever it is, you don't care about.
I don't know if that's necessarily true. I think it can be true in some situations, but I think there are ways to approach the same heights of pain in which you can still find meaning.
Yeah, it's not to say that, meaning can't be found with like any level of pain.
Marcus Aurelius talks about how life has pain, and there's chronic pain, and there's temperamental pain, and but that there is no such thing. We've already talked about this, right?
Yeah, go on though.
That there's no such thing as unendurable pain, because chronic pain brings with it its own end.
Right, because if you think you can't stand another second, you've already done it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think the physical pain maybe isn't actually the best thing to focus on, because the pain that I really think is central to this argument is more like psychological pain and emotional pain, more just kind of like existential, like I was saying, the recognition that your death is, inevitable, and that your life can go sideways in, a bunch of different ways, and just dealing with the reality of that, and of having people you care about that are, always under threat of getting hurt, or that's the kind of the thing that's kind of like an inescapable cost that I think it's more like more relevant than talking about physical pain, because physical pain is so like it's very hit or miss whether people will actually have that kind of thing, at any point in their lives.
Sure.
Whereas I think you could argue that anyone, is going to go through some very intense psychological pain at some point in their, at multiple points in their lives, even if it's just, like a relationship ending or something.
I mean, I still think it stands true that there's no unendurable pain.
Yeah, and it kind of gets back to everything is suffering. I mean, that's kind of like, it's actually kind of like a miss translation of I think what the word the original word in Buddhist texts means, and I think it's dukkha. Do you know?
I'm not familiar.
Yeah, I think dukkha is suffering, and it doesn't exactly mean like suffering isn't the exact translation. It's more like unfulfillment or something. Because life is constantly, you're not getting, either you're getting your gratified, you're getting your desires. Either you're not getting your desires gratified, or you're getting them gratified, and then another one appears that you immediately focus on.
Yeah.
And so you're in this constant state of unfulfillment, and that, I feel like that is very connected to this whole idea that we're kind of engineered to suffer, just because of our reward system, and because of the way we experience pain.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. I think that it's possible to overcome that existential dread.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, for me, I've gone through. I know this isn't complete. I know this is impartial, but I've gone through some changes in the last couple years um, after my sister passed away. Before that, I was very much gripped with the fear of death and the fear of her death and of experiencing that. You know, she was chronically ill, and just like I had a visceral fear of that it should happen, and then it did happen, and it was bad, but it wasn't the end. Like I kept going and had meaningful experiences after that point.
Mm-hmm.
And for that to be the case, that it feels to me that I am no longer in the same way afraid of death. I actually, in a sort of meaningful way, I've seen it, I understand it to some extent, and I'm not afraid of it. I accept it as the inevitable result.
Yeah. I mean, that's definitely something I can't really, like, an experience I can't really speak to. And I think uh part of, just like with suffering, you kind of have to turn and embrace it to actually, you know, deal with it, because you can't just put it off and say, oh, I'm not going to worry about that, or it'll just be better if I don't think about it, because it'll
Yeah.
it'll get to you one way or another. Yeah, and there is there is some beauty, and that's just that's the that's how life works, and we're all kind of just kind of temporary like apparitions.
Yeah. Yeah, the point isn't to live for 10,000 years or 20,000 years. It's to live for now and then pass on your genes and then die.
Yeah.
Or rather than saying pass on your genes, I think I would embrace a more diffused understanding of that, which would be for me passing on your ideas. And I think a very, very potent way that people do that often is through rearing offspring, but I don't think that's the only way.
Yeah. I mean, there are a bunch of different ways to have like an impact past your death. Although I think that's another question you can ask, is what's the inherent value of that, and is that just kind of like a ego, like selfish, I want to somehow outlast my death, and I want to have this impact, and that could be a totally like selfless thing. I mean, you can want to have a really positive impact.
Yeah, I mean, I think it has to be selfless unless you like want your name to be stuck on it, and we all know how hopeless that is.
Yeah.
That's kind of the point of passing through that veil of dying. You exist, you impart your control, you send out a ripple, and then you give it up and see what happens.
Yeah, or don't see what happens, because
yeah, right. Trust that something will happen.
Yeah. I think along with something like love, I think just the fact that we can like perceive each other at all makes things intensely meaningful.
Yes.
And intensely, worthwhile.
Yeah, that's really what it's all made out of, isn't it?
Yeah.
Do you remember when I encouraged you and Maddie to look into each other's eyes for 10 minutes?
I do remember that. Yeah, that actually kind of fucked me up. I remember.
You mentioned that.
Yeah.
Talk about that. I don't remember how.
Yeah. I mean, that was just so much just like a product of like being in a long distance relationship. And just like when you're doing that and then like, you know, your partner comes to visit for a week, you're just putting like so much pressure on yourself and your partner to have it be like, you know, an amazing 100% amazing time and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And I just got like worried that she wasn't like smiling enough or something. And I just got kind of like, I don't know. And I like had somehow sensed some like weird vibes just when we were hanging out. And I think that kind of just like snowballed in my head. And yeah, I was totally not getting the point of the thing you were, because I don't think I'd even taken acid at that point, so I don't think I really.
You definitely had taken acid at that point.
Oh really?
Yeah.
This was
because this was when I was with that guy Chris in that
right.
motel apartment.
Right.
Which was after I got back from Amsterdam senior year.
Okay. Yeah. Well, if I had, I guess I'd taken it, but I probably wasn't thinking about. I still don't think I got what you were talking about when you're like, oh, but I'm like perceiving you and you're perceiving me, and like it's like I think that kind of just like went over my head a little bit.
Do you think you understand that now?
Oh, totally. I mean, just the like. If you actually, you know, are looking at someone and are thinking about the fact that they're experiencing the same thing that you are, but they're looking at your face, which is an experience that you cannot have, and we're so you know, programmed by the prevalence of like mirrors and cameras into thinking that you can actually do that, you know, like see your own face, but you can't do that in, you know, reality ever, right? Without without some kind of like, you know, auxiliary like reflective surface. Yeah, and just the fact that you're like your perception is it's like all there is for you, and that the other person, that what they're perceiving, that's the only thing they can perceive as well. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a really beautiful thing.
And I mean, like, if, you know, because it's all just the universe, and it's all just the universe, you know, being able to look at itself, and just the fact that that's how it's doing it, and it's creating all these like emotions and everything. It's like that. I mean, that's pretty beautiful.
Absolutely.
So, okay. So what do you say to the idea that like humans on the planet are just a completely destructive environmental scourge that's, you know, inflicting suffering on millions of animals and all that good stuff?
Shit, you might actually, I think you might have a point. If ever there was an argument for anti-natalism, that would be it.
Yeah.
Throw the rest of it out. I think the rest of it's garbage. But that actually, I don't know if I can refute that exactly. I can pose another perspective, but it really kind of feels like a Hail Mary shot to me. I think that the more realistic perspective is that humanity in its current state, in our current society, is a virus upon the earth that is bringing unnecessary destruction.
I mean, yeah, that's true in some sense. It's also true that, you know, nature on its own is pretty brutal, and that, you know, sure, we're creating like environmental problems, but as far as like the actual, like, you know, raw amount of suffering, like that actually isn't being changed too much. And that like the environmental destruction is like the things that we care about are the things that end up, you know, making us sad that the environment is being destroyed. But it's not like, because we like the idea that there are rainforests that exist, and we like the idea that there's the Great Barrier Reef is there for us to go see. But as far as like whether we want those things for their own sake, I don't know if we can, like whether those things are like beneficial on their own.
Well, I think it's pretty darn clear that they are. And in fact, if I could, I think to speak for myself, my concern is absolutely for their own benefit, despite whether I get to see it or not.
Mm-hmm.
I think their inherent their existence is inherently valuable in the same way as our own is. That I think there's absolutely some aspect of consciousness being reflected in these ecosystems, and to destroy that makes a poorer world.
Mm-hmm. I guess, but so I'm still, I guess what I'm getting at is a poorer world from our perspective still, though, right? And the non-existence of the Great Barrier Reef isn't actually like increasing any suffering, like on a like nervous systems of animals level.
But
it's just our human sadness that it doesn't exist.
But here we're going back to you're trying to reduce the quantity of suffering as if that's the only measurement of value. And we've already talked about how the amount of suffering is not directly related to the inherent value of the system.
Right.
I think that the mere existence of these entities and these ecosystems has inherent value, regardless of any suffering in any situation.
Yeah, you're right. I was just trying to point out that like our initial reason for like wanting to, for saying humans are a virus and that we're destroying everything is like rooted, at least in some sense, in like the value we're placing on things, and not completely like absolute, if that makes sense.
Maybe. But the other thing to consider is if you were to consider the Earth as as an ecology, as like an entity almost, that what humanity is doing is reducing the resilience of life on the planet. It's creating a less diverse ecosystem, which makes it more and more prone to ecological collapse, which can snowball if you have a narrow enough ecology.
Totally. Yeah.
I actually have the sense that maybe we don't realize how close we are to teetering off that edge.
No, I agree. Yeah, I'm playing devil's advocate a little bit, because I think that destruction of nature is like inherently bad, just because it's causing unneeded suffering and destroying the potential for lots of flourishing of conscious beings.
Yes. So here's my Hail Mary. If you look at the history of life on this planet, there have been a number of mass extinctions that have occurred, where 99% of all life or something like that is completely destroyed. And that's happened a few times. And obviously, like, if we could do something about that, that would be good. But humanity is the only thing that has arisen on Earth that, through use of its technology, could potentially see those things coming and avert the catastrophe.
That is true. That's actually a pretty good argument. I hadn't even thought of that. yeah, you're totally right. I mean, we are the one species that can do anything even close to trying to stop
Yeah.
or like mitigate like an asteroid impact or a super volcano or whatever it is.
Hmm. And I think right now we're doing a pretty shitty job about accepting that responsibility and like how much of the U.S. government's budget is going into NASA and like sciences, and how much is going into making bombs and money for rich people.
Yeah. No, it's it's obscene.
Mm-hmm. If we're not the natural disaster, then we're the solution to the next one.
Yeah, have you heard like the whole I think this is a Nick Bostrom thing about like if you imagine that all potential like possible technologies are in this bag, and all the like innocuous ideas are these white marbles, but there's several marbles in there that are black marbles, and those are ideas that when you pull them out, it's almost certain that your civilization will be destroyed. Like some people, it's still possible that nuclear bombs are one of those. AI could also be the same way, or advances in gene editing stuff.
Self-replicating nanobots.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it might only be a matter of time before that happens.
Yeah. And the only thing that could potentially save us from that inevitability is our own foresight.
Yeah. Which it's not clear we're gonna have. Or the other thing is, like it's really hard to stop something from ever being invented. Like that just seems kind of like a hopeless task, because someone will be able to fly under the radar and create it potentially.
Yeah, unless we have drastic sociological changes so that people wouldn't want to do that because everyone appreciates the value of existence.
Yeah. It's also we could develop this is another Nick Bostrom thing, but we could develop a technology that's so dangerous that we would be justified in putting all of humanity on a totalitarian, like constant surveillance type situation because of the risk of any one person getting a hold of this technology would be like so dangerous and to everyone on average that you'd be able to justify that.
Wow. That's a chilling thought.
Yeah, I mean it's hard to imagine something like that wouldn't just immediately like destroy everything anyway.
So for there to be existence, I feel like there has to be a shadow. There always has to be some existence that is in suffering.
I would yeah, I mean given our current biology, I don't think that all forms of existence.
I mean that as a fundamental law of nature, not just our own biological experience.
Interesting. So so why is that exactly?
Well, so there's a couple approaches. The one way I could say is that look at our world where we are right now. There is suffering, and in all of the possible realms of existence that could ever happen, that if it were possible to have existence without the suffering, we would have that. But we don't, which means that sometimes there has to be suffering because there is right now.
No, but I mean that's just because of evolution.
Well, but it is. But the fact of the matter is, it exists. There is this current existence that has suffering, and as we've talked about, time is like present, right? Things in the past, they're still happening there in eternity. Like those moments of suffering that exist right now and have happened in our past will always have happened. And so in order to get to a point where there's some hypothetical existence without suffering, we had to go through suffering.
Interesting. I still don't it still seems like this is all just like, are you saying like you can't imagine evolution having happened without pain evolving at some point?
I guess that's one way to put it. Or could you imagine any sort of conscious existence springing into being without having gone through the process of suffering?
I mean, it all, it all depends on how you define suffering. I mean, if we are just kind of some intelligence that's running some kind of reward function, like a very complicated one, right? You could just say that suffering is something that doesn't, that you're trying to move away from on the reward function to make it, its value increase. And that suffering is just kind of like scoring low with that function.
Sure. Although again, that the reward and suffering are the results and not the actual thing that is bad.
Yeah, because I mean, the whole reason that like consciousness and intelligence exists is to like, further the proliferation of the genetic code, right? And so that's necessarily going to involve defending from harm, which is necessarily going to involve some kind of perception of harm.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's one approach I can say. Another thing that kind of makes sense to me is that so imagine you have absolute nothingness. That's cold, right?
I mean, no, it's nothing.
Well, okay, sure, but isn't cold an absence of heat? Cold.
Okay, we're still talking about nothing though, right?
Yeah. So okay, but cold is an absence of heat. It's not an actual thing. It is a nothingness, right?
Right.
Cool. So you have something that is you have nothingness, a little pocket of nothingness, and then within that nothingness suddenly manifests a something that whatever that thing is, it is not nothing. It is a tangible present thing with an energy signature. That's warm, right?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay, so what we have is a warm thing directly and entirely surrounded by an absolutely cold thing. That thing is going to feel that disparity. All of that empty space around it is going to suck on the energy and diffuse it, right?
Yeah, sure.
So
where is this going?
So that thing that popped into existence, let's say it's conscious and it wants to live, right? So now you have a thing that has come into existence and immediately is surrounded by what has to be considered pain. Because it's directly contrary.
Yeah.
Ergo, for things to
natural
exist amid nothingness, then they have to experience pain.
Yeah, and it's kind of going against the second law of thermodynamics, right? To persist, you have to kind of resist the natural
exactly
direction of the universe, which is towards less order.
Mm-hmm. And so if you consider the conundrum of the fact that anything exists at all, like that there is things instead of not things, like at some point you have to say that things came out of nothingness.
Well, it's also possible that nothingness is actually not a meaningful concept.
Yeah, okay, I buy that, but at the same time, I think it is also a meaningful concept.
I mean, it's useful. I don't know. The question we don't know is whether it actually maps onto anything that's in reality. Because like where would it be?
Yeah, which is a great point. But I think what that actually somehow implies is that everything exists directly in contact with nothingness.
Right? It's like it's defined by that it's not nothingness.
Yeah, exactly. And so that definition is like the line, the dividing line between existing and not existing, and everything is pressed up against that line. So everything has to feel that existential suffering.
Right.
I don't know.
You can, I mean, you can still, I mean, even, still, I think arguing that suffering has to be there doesn't quite answer the question of whether it's good or not.
Oh no,
or whether the question, it doesn't answer the question of whether the pain and the good stuff balance out.
You're right. I don't think it has anything to do with that question. It's just a little side question of its own.
Yeah.
So let's talk about death.
All right.
So I believe this is an idea from Marcus Aurelius that I accept, that in order to have life, you have to have the freedom to die.
I can get behind that.
However, and what he talks about is in the context of like, oh, well, if my physical suffering, if these horrible, petty people around me and this totally pointless life is not worth living anymore, then I should have the courage to kill myself.
Mm-hmm.
And that gives my life meaning.
Mm-hmm.
I don't take it in that same way, because I don't think that the need to be able to die is I don't think it requires a violent act.
What do you mean by that?
So let's talk for example of suicide. Any sort of suicide is a violence to your biological system that causes it to separate.
Mm-hmm.
No matter what it is, no matter how gentle and chemical, whatever it is, it's still a violence. Mm-hmm. You're disrupting a system. I don't think that's necessary, and I think that to impose such a violence is inherently harmful overall. But I still think that it's necessary to have the freedom to die. So the way that we can reconcile those two truths is that it's also necessary to embrace a disillusionment of the self.
Embrace a disillusionment of the self.
Yeah. Or be able to. So you have your own constructed identity, right? Mm-hmm. This is who I am. It's a combination of many impulses that come together to create this one profile. Mm-hmm. And that's what you identify yourself as. Mm. But I think it's absolutely necessary to recognize that in a very real sense, what you are is not that constructed identity, but you are all of the individual parts that construct that identity.
Totally. Yeah.
And that, yeah.
Yeah.
And so that each of those parts has its own impulses, and some of them want to live and some of them want to die.
Right. Yeah, I think we were talking about this some
Mm-hmm.
point earlier. Yeah, it's kind
Yeah,
of
we were.
unfair. You're kind of, one part of you can wield considerable power over the other parts.
Mm-hmm. And here's another thing where I kind of agree with, I actually agree with David Benatar, in that he talks about how it's harmful to have an idea of forcing people to live when they don't want to. I think that's absolutely true. It's the same kind of violence as you would impose as if you were to kill yourself.
Yeah. I mean, you do have to be careful though that, the reason that they don't want to keep living isn't because of some like chemical, imbalance that's just, causing them to needlessly suffer.
I mean, I can't speak to that. That has nothing to do with my own experience, except for to say that I have gone through periods of depression, which can be described as a chemical imbalance. And in those periods, I've had suicidal thoughts. And what was valuable to me at the time was to recognize that those parts of me that wanted to die, I could allow them to. So rather than trying to hold them hostage into existing, just letting go of them and allowing them to die.
Interesting. Huh. Because then they just disappear.
Yeah, and then the parts of you that don't want to die get to take control.
Yeah, I mean, I like if I'm trying to reach back and remember what like my experience was like, it was like it's like existing at all that you're trying to get away from. It's like the part of you that is aware, that's the part that doesn't want to be there. The part that's like aware of anything at all, which is kind of hard.
But I don't think that's
hard to separate
Sorry,
from. It's hard to separate from like the rest of you, I guess.
But the part of you that is aware of itself is a construct, and so it can die without killing all the parts of you.
Right, but it's not that I don't want to be aware of. It's not that I don't want to be self-aware. It's that I don't want to be aware.
But that's just your particular entity that feels that way about living, and if you allow that entity to stop existing, eventually, and you do that repeatedly over time, eventually what will be left is an entity that doesn't feel that same way about living, one that is glad to be existing at all.
Yeah, I guess I just debate what it actually means to quote unquote let something die in your brain, which, I mean that it like it kind of just seems like you're talking about like a mindfulness thing where like you like it keeps arising and you keep being like, like I'm just going to let that, fade away. Like, is that kind of what you're talking about?
It's that, yeah, definitely that sort of thing.
Yeah. It can work. I guess it just like depends on the. Yeah, I feel like it probably depends on the particular person.
I mean, it depends on if you can accept it, and if you can accept it, then it'll work.
I mean, I don't like. I mean, now we're getting into like free will about whether you can like choose to, choose to accept things or not.
Yeah, I think it's possible to get on a treadmill of fear and anxiety where you don't have the space for breathing, and in that maybe you don't have free will of all of the steps that comprise that loop.
Yeah, I mean, anxiety definitely like interferes with a sense of free will, just because you're so overloaded with information, you can't really think too much about how to change course.
But again, tying that back into what I was just saying, what worked again for me was allowing that machine to roll off into its own inevitable destruction rather than feeding it continually.
Yeah. Yeah, or just like, you know, you can just kind of put a box around it and say like, that part of the brain is going to do its thing, you know, like I'm not going to, you know, like let it, you know, let it bother me, because it comes back to the thing of everything is just a thought, right? And and you have the power when something is a thought to latch onto it or not to latch onto it in some sense.
Yes. Yeah, that's it exactly. That's the freedom. That's another way to say the freedom to exist or not to exist.
You mean the latching thing?
Yeah.
Yeah. Although, I mean, I say freedom and we still need to have like a free will discussion, but I think that's not free will, but that's like attention, which is the closest thing to a self that we have, I think, because the self itself is actually an illusion, but the seat of attention, or at least the ability to subjectively be able to point it in certain directions, I think that's what most people would call free will. But I think even that, because your change in what you're paying attention to is preceded by a thought of changing that the focus of the attention, right? And that thought itself arose without a prompt in your brain. It just kind of appeared, right?
That's interesting. I'll have to think about that. I don't know if I buy that necessarily. I don't know if I buy that progression of it, but that's I think still a very interesting way to think about it.
Yeah.
We'll have to devote an entire episode to that.
Yeah, for sure. So the real question is, was this conversation worth it?
Well, you know, if I had known it would have been this bad when I went into it, I probably wouldn't have done it, but I'm not going to like stop now that I'm here.
That's what she said.
Oh my god. Wow. That one wins the cake. Oh my god. Ooh. Jesus.
Should we end it there?
Yeah. Uh-huh.